Well, welcome everybody to a new episode of the Art Business Podcast. And today's episode looks at a phenomenon that's been quietly gaining momentum over the last few years, but which raises some really interesting questions for how art is shown and experienced, supported and valued. I'm talking about the rise of the private home gallery. So I'm actually sitting in the kitchen, if I may say, of my guest's house in Hampstead. Primrose Hill.
Hill.
I didn't know how specific I could be. And it's really beautiful here. So the park is very, very nearby. I'm looking out at a lovely kind of so we'll come to the architecture later on, in fact. But it's a lovely setting. I can hear the birdsong, and Regent's Park is literally 1 minute's walk away. So it's kind of this lovely. It feels suburban, but what makes London so wonderful is the proximity we always have to nature. And this is very much a theme, actually, of the current exhibition that we'll probably talk about. So I'm joined by Lupe Sanchez, a curator and advisor whose career spans blue chip galleries, Haunch of Venison, for example, Pila Carrillas, to name a couple. Yeah. Cross-industry cultural work, and more recently, an intense engagement with artists and artisans in Japan. Alongside her is Iain Pattie, an architect and property developer with over 5 decades of experience designing spaces that balance function, longevity, and human experience. And the building that I'm sitting in, it's very much in the modernist tradition, which is obviously part of this area of London. It's got lots of beautiful historic houses, Georgian and so on, but it also has some very important examples of modernism, I think. And I think Ian's work is working within that kind of tradition, if you like. Together, they are the co-founders of the Wolf Collective, a curatorial platform based in their private home in Primrose Hill. It's a domestic space which has organically, it seems, adapted to create exhibitions, like domestic exhibitions, that emphasize intimacy. That's a very important word, I think, in the space I'm looking at from my conversations I've already had with Iain and Lupe, and dialogue. We've had a lot of dialogue, as well as access. It's a very free, very well lit space. I was just talking to Lupe and Iain about experiences in Amsterdam with my students a couple of weeks ago, where we were looking at museum spaces, and I was saying that the Dutch love light and space, and that's very much how I feel here. And the artworks that are on display here are very beautifully displayed, but it's very much tying in with the architectural context as well. Their current exhibition is a solo presentation by the Chicago-based artist Jaclyn Mednicov, who apparently has been a friend of Lupe's for many years.
Yes.
And they've worked together as artist and curator for a long period now, 30 years?
Well, I mean, mostly as friends, but, those dialogues become projects. You start to turn dreams into plans, and that's what we've done with this exhibition.
Exactly. And now Jaclyn's works, I'm surrounded by these works, and they're on the walls, they're hanging from the ceiling, they're on tables, there's 3D work, there's 2D work, there's installations. Her work spans ceramics, painting, printmaking, and installation, and much of it developed through long periods of research in Japan. And we'll come back to some collaborations she's had with Japanese artists, for example. So what I'm interested in exploring today is not simply what the Wolf Collective does, but why this model is emerging now more and more, and what it tells us about audiences, artists, and the economics of the contemporary art world. So, Lupe, maybe I can start with you. Your career spans commercial galleries, as we've already said, like Pila Carrillas and the Haunch of Venison, but also fashion and media and philanthropy and advisory work outside the art world. So what was missing or no longer satisfying about the conventional gallery and institutional ecosystem that made you open to imagining something like this, something like the Wolf Collective?
Well, I mean, really, to be honest, I had such a brilliant experience working with Pilar at Haunch of Venison, and she was such an incredible mentor to me. And she's this kind of balance of life force and intellect. And I had the pleasure and privilege of working very, very closely by her and just observing that her relationship with artists and their work and collectors was very cerebral, but it was also very playful. That it was about those personal connections, conversations that were creating new perceptions, new frameworks. And that was so inspiring for me. So life kind of intervened and I moved from the art world into these other disciplines as you've described. But really, I've always held that inspiration from my time with Pilar and have used that across my, sort of movements. And it has always served me well because it is a direct contact with others, sharing ideas, sharing perspectives. So it wasn't really about a reaction against or a criticism of previous models, but just working with what we have. This is our home, and we were living with art for a long time, both of us separately, and then coming together, bringing our collections together, bringing our communities together. It just made sense to use our space. We were already having people come around, look at our art, feed them, give them wine, just experiencing the pleasures of life together. And so it really grew organically out of that we felt as we had these moments that we could be more intentional and really curate experiences and explorations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think let's introduce Iain now. So Iain, your own background is very different, or is it? Architecture, hospitality, large-scale commercial spaces, and later property development. So, from your perspective, what did you see in Lupe's curatorial ways of thinking that made this partnership make sense? And what did your architecture allow you to contribute that a conventional white cube gallery wouldn't? And I will say to people, because we're recording this as audio only, it feels very white cubey in here on one level because your aesthetic is mainly about light and white walls, because there's a lot of very, very interesting sort of light. There's a light well just behind me, bringing light down, and there's an art installation in there that we'll talk about. But also the whole there's just basically window screen windows looking out onto the patio and the garden. There's sculptures in the garden as well. So maybe you could just talk to that, the way that did you always envision when you designed this house that there would also be art involved?
Yes, definitely. I think I'd take a little step back first.
Yeah.
And interestingly, I went to a tiny little art college in Scotland called Duncan of Jordanson, which at the time that I went there, it was 600 students and that included all the art disciplines as well as architecture and interior design. So throughout my education, I was mixing with artists all of the time. So, I, does that give me a different perspective on things? I think it probably does, because you're naturally at home and comfortable with people who are in different disciplines. Uh, then I came to design this house. Originally, I lived in a typical Victorian terrace house, tall, narrow. This house is low and wide. And did I envisage art in here? Yes, obviously. I had my own collection. And I think when I was designing it, I was designing a series of three-dimensional spaces that could accommodate different things. I wasn't specifically thinking in the future it's going to be an art gallery, but that's just been a natural evolution of Lupe and I getting together and actually talking about it and allowing the place to evolve for us and how we use it. So I don't think we're trying to. Oh, the white cube gallery is something else, although this is a white cube space. But what a number of our artists have actually said there's actually more wall space in here than there is in a lot of galleries, which makes it quite interesting. And to be honest, I didn't think of that when I was designing it. But it's been part of the evolution of what we do and how we display things. And the space is actually, I think, strong enough to take different installations.
No, definitely. And before we started the recording, I was admitting that, and I've said this to my students a lot, I don't like art galleries because in the National Gallery, in the British Museum, which are my main areas really, everything's taken out of context. The altarpieces have been taken out of the sacred context, but it's not just about the sacred context, it's about the light. These Renaissance artists, like the Pompeian ones I studied in my PhD, they were also using the real light source. So they have like a biblical painting in the Renaissance, but a mythological painting in a, say, Pompeian room. And honestly, they will always adapt the light to the mythological or sacred figures in each, so that you're a part of that space. And the moment you put that on in a gallery space, so to me, this seems like Parche commercial white cube gallery curators, but to me, this seems a step up from that, because I think we're seeing the art as it is kind of almost intended to be seen as part of an organic home, part of your relationship.
Yes, and I think that was intentional.
Yeah,
it was intentional to see art in a place that is lived in, and see art in a home environment. And I do remember there was one of our collectors was here, and he said something about, but should you get some gallery lighting in here? And I just thought, no.
Yes.
Because that's not how the art would be displayed in someone's home.
Sure.
And this is our home, and this is where we live.
Yes.
And so when we've not got visitors here, and when we've not got an event on, we're living in this space as our proper family home.
Yes, and so although I haven't been here when it gets dark, but I can see there's quite a lot of like ceiling lighting, which you can presumably
they're all dimmable.
Yeah. And then there's a couple of lamps hanging over the dining table, but certainly in the daytime, that it really shows off the works on the walls and the current exhibition and on the tables. And there's a very kind of modernist fireplace. The fire's lit today. It's still quite chilly in London. And above it, we've actually got some of the current artworks that we will talk about later on. I was going to continue to ask questions about the home as gallery, as you like, or as a way to display art. But I think we've already sort of spoken about that. So let's talk about, so Lupe, one of the phrases that comes up repeatedly in discussions of your collective, the Wolf Collective, is intimacy. It's a word that comes up quite a lot. So in practical curatorial terms, what does intimacy mean here in this space? And how does it change the way you select artists, install work, and then invite audiences?
It's such a good question. And I'm not surprised that it's cropped up so many times when you're looking about and thinking about the Wolf Collective, because really it's at the core of every part of this project. Each relationship, those between people, those between objects, between the experiences and the environment, they're deeply personal, born from our own interests, our passions, and our curiosities. So really that's so foundational. And the project is grounded in and tethered to that intimacy. So all of the relationships that we create with our artists, they are founded upon these very human aspects. We were talking earlier about the impact of AI and how, if you love humanity and you love things made by human beings, and you really need to show up in the real world, not as an algorithm, but as a human. And that calls for intimacy. It calls for personal narratives. It calls for the senses to be present. And so that's what we mean by intimacy, being physically engaged, being, holistic in your perceptions of the work.
And do you think intimacy is something that you can? I'm just thinking about my students, some of whom will go into curating. Is intimacy something you can curate, or I mean, could you do this in Haunch of Venison, the way where you worked, or
Well,
what?
I mean, Haunch of Venison was a very, very special place. It was Lord Nelson's old house. So,
Yes.
the top story was his map room. And the things that you were saying about light and the presence of light and space
Mhm.
was also applicable to a gallery like that, but again, that was a private home.
Mm.
And I think architecture holds memory. The stories are in the masonry.
Mhm.
And so there's a magic inbuilt if you have a place where people are living. This is a living space. So I don't think it's contrived or curated. It's just the nature of that space.
That's interesting. So it's not something that probably most gallerists who are basically in a standard white cube building that has no particular heritage history.
Mm.
It's not something that they would probably even think of engaging with.
Yeah.
This sense of intimacy, because it is coming from the architecture and the history of the building.
Yeah. I mean, you're obviously a very intuitive, observant person. I'm sure you can feel things as you go into certain spaces and then feel either nothing or very little when you go into other spaces. And I think it's just about being sensitive to those things and responding to, as I say, what you have around you, utilizing that in its best way.
And honestly, it felt on an emotional, personal level, it's very refreshing to come into somewhere like this when I spend a lot of time going into standard white cube galleries, if you like. Amazing art
Yeah.
and amazing people curating, but it doesn't have that sense of I can feel something happening here.
Yeah.
I mean, and even though some of the work you own and some of the work you're displaying on behalf of the artist, and it might one day not be here, there's a sense of transiency, which is, I find, very exciting at the same time.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
love that.
I don't know whether, I was going to ask, does it depend on the behavior from the visitors? But I think that you don't need to curate that. I mean, if a visitor comes in and doesn't feel empathetic with the building and with you and with the work, they're probably not going to stay around for very long anyway. But in your experience, I mean, I know you had some potential collectors in this morning.
Yes.
Do they, what kind of things do they say, once they've been in here?
I think it's a very interesting space because you have no idea when you're on the outside
Mm,
what is going to happen once you
that's true.
come inside.
Mm.
It looks
Yeah.
tiny.
Yeah.
It looks very close.
Yes.
And then you open the door
Hmm.
and all of a sudden a whole universe starts to
Yeah.
reveal itself to you. So I think my observations, when I'm able to have these very direct observations of people coming in and just kind of watching where their eyes go, how they start to settle, how they start to arrive and land in the space. It does take some time, but I feel that there's a sense that they're being welcomed. They've been invited to be here. It's not like they've stumbled across something. It's very intentional. And I think, domestic spaces, they're places for community, places to commune, to gather, to connect. And so again, that's just part of the nature of a home.
Yeah, and probably your curatorial experience has taught you to observe. Because
Yeah.
one thing I say to my students is that yes, when at the start of your career you may well be front of house welcoming people in, but watch people.
Absolutely.
You'll learn an awful lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Some of the ladies who were here this morning,
Hmm.
they were asking questions about the art, but they were also asking questions about the architecture and the interior design,
Hmm.
and they were asking about the finishes that we have and things like that, and how the space worked.
Hmm.
And I think going back a step to my architectural career, a, a lot of my work was in central London, so it was existing buildings. So I tried to manipulate space within an existing building to create something functional and dynamic at the same time, but also because a lot of it was hotels where the interior is transient by the very nature of the industry
Mm-hmm.
that, and in 5 years' time, another interior designer will come in and do something else.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried to create strong enough three-dimensional spaces that it would stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think subconsciously, when I designed this house, I've been thinking about that as well. And we've had now, this is 4 exhibitions, all with quite different work,
Mm-hmm.
but they all sit comfortably in this space.
Mm-hmm.
So, I intentionally or unintentionally, I honestly don't know. I've created a space that can actually accommodate the art and accommodate the displays. And I think that contributes to the experience when people come in here.
Well, it feels like a very domestic, practical place to live, but it's hard to describe to people on the audio. But there's at the same time, there's all these very interesting little sort of corridors and spaces
Yeah.
that you want to kind of investigate. There's a basement, there's a staircase, and there's, as I say, there's a lot of use of light coming in from above and horizontally as well from the garden. So it kind of feels like a quite complicated space,
Yeah.
but I suspect it's actually on
No,
plan
it's quite simple.
quite simple,
Yes.
quite geometric.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are nooks and crannies, and we were also talking about, you were talking about the avoidance of curatorial lighting, and that's got very sophisticated these days
Yeah,
with these
yeah.
focus lights. Sotheby's auction house spent invested a lot of money into these new lights, and the reason they did so is because the works look amazing.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
is a different.
Yeah.
I think my next question, we could talk about that sort of curating the space and the light and the works within it, because in some ways this private domestic model, and there's nothing new in this. I mean, you go into a studiolo in the Gonzaga Palace in Mantua. It's a tiny room, and it's quite a private space probably, but the Gonzagas are showing off their art collections
Yeah.
to their best friends in a very intimate space very often, and that's kind of what this feels like. So there's nothing kind of new in it really, but it does resist the spectacle and the scale and the need in some ways for constant novelty that a curator in an orthodox commercial white cube gallery would feel, that they've got to constantly sort of renew, create a novel, put a new work in the window that's completely different from the last show that's gone now,
Right.
and create a new sense of spectacle. And the same with the auction houses, they do it really well. It's a bit like opera designs changing from night to night.
Yeah.
You move from a contemporary exhibition to an old master. They do it brilliantly, but it is about spectacle and the size and scale, and the need for novelty to keep people coming back. This feels different to that. I don't know whether you could
Yeah.
both speak to that.
I think we want each show to feel distinctive and exciting and different from the last show, but we're not trying to be novel.
Mhm.
We're just following our own passions, our
Mhm.
own curiosities. We're working with artists who we really believe in, whose work we love. And so it grows out of that. As Iain was saying, this is a domestic space. So we want to share with collectors. You don't have to turn your house upside down to invite art in. Be with what you have already. You don't have to spend a fortune on special lighting. Yeah, sure, the work would look even more incredible if we had gallery lighting, but we're not going to change the space.
And you couldn't live with that. I mean, you
No.
couldn't live
No.
in one of
No,
those galleries.
the
It would
light,
drive you
the
crazy.
light would be too hot.
But it's also making the work, it's privileging the works of art, whereas a lot of this is about interior design and the holistic effect. It's a word you used earlier.
Mm.
The whole thing is organic.
Well, it's about living with art.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that experience, it does happen in a very holistic way. It does grow and shift over, through the course of a single day and over the course of the months through the seasons. And so, it's kind of just allowing nature to inform what the lighting is like, what the feeling is like. So, we don't really have to do very much. We're just responding to our environment and the seasonal shifts.
Yeah. What's wonderful and some might find surprising about a modernist space, if you like, is the integration of nature. I mean, again, looking out into So the garden space, if I may say so, it's a continuation of the white,
Yeah.
bright effect. But but at the same time, there's beautiful plants and trees, and I think from our conversations before we started this, and the exhibition of Jaclyn's work you're showing at the moment, a lot of this is about culture and nature interacting and bouncing off one another. I don't like that word, bouncing off, but integrating and playing off one another.
Yeah.
It's a delicate dance that's going on here.
But also I think that this invisible wall is a great metaphor for all of that, that you do have this kind of containment.
Sure.
And it's boundaried, and it's personal and private, but we've, in the very kind of French salon tradition, we've turned a private living room into a public space of culture. That, it's the same idea that we're letting in what is beyond the walls, but still containing it and engaging with nature, engaging with community, engaging with what is beyond, but still within this very private, intimate setting.
Yeah, because it's interesting, because it's not like the 18th century idea of the garden. I'm thinking of actual architecture, like, say, Chiswick House, which has these wonderful 18th century, restored gardens, and even Jane Austen's novels. The garden is nature, and it gets wilder the further away you get.
Yes.
And the romances take place at the end of the garden, not in, whereas here, this is very much if I may say so, it's very much an extension of the.
Yes.
I don't feel as though that looks any different. The outside doesn't look much different.
And it is an urban garden. It's a large garden townhouse in central London, but it's not a large garden in the classical sense. So, it was deliberately designed to be producing, we're getting a warmer climate, an inside-out space.
Absolutely.
And it flows. And actually, when we have evenings here, it functions as that.
I can imagine.
When the weather is nice, we open the doors.
Yes.
And people will stand outside and chat.
Yeah.
And then wander back into the house again. And that was the intention. And it's actually happening, which is quite nice.
Yeah. And during the more moderate months, we're able to use that as a performance space. So we've had, musical performances out there, literary events, poetry readings.
Yes.
Yeah. So it really expands the space. During the winter months, we have performances in that corner. So we often do an art and music event with the exhibitions, again, to just layer the experience, tune in with more than one of your senses. This kind of synesthetic multisensorialism is something I'm deeply fascinated by. So, the outside does offer new possibilities when the weather allows for that. And it does really expand the experience.
Do you have dancing or what sort of music, for example? Is it?
We haven't had dancing. Yeah, we don't have dancing.
We're not averse to it.
Yeah, we haven't had dancing yet, but we have had several musical performances, and some of them are, unplugged acoustic sets, and some of them, we had an incredible young cellist. He's called William Jack. He trained as a jazz guitarist and then decided, he was very proficient and decided, I want to expand my learning, and moved to Vienna and trained as a classical cellist. And he's at a point now in his young musical career that he wants to merge those two things. So he plays a small-bodied cello played on its side in the same way that, a violinist plays a fiddle. And so I jokingly say, we should call it a chiddle, because it is this kind of, this, again, new frameworks, new modes of making sound or making, visual expressions, that it's all part of the experimentation of engaging with the house, engaging with yourself. So those kind of things, it really enhances the experience of the art, especially because within our community, often people will come and see a show 3 or 4 times. So we try to make it dynamic. So there's always an opening reception, the private view. It's very social. It's very buzzy. And then there's going to be an art and music event, which is more intimate. It's a much more kind of small, intentional group of invitees, because it doesn't allow for as many people. And then we do a Meet the Makers panel discussion, which is an opportunity for our community to really listen to the inspirations, the techniques and processes of these artists, ask questions, talk about what they're doing. It's very interactive, very engaging. So that's all very much a part of the program.
So it's not, I was thinking of like a string quartet playing Mozart or something. It's not, it can be quite.
William Jack did play the Bach from the Bach cello suites, yes. But yes, we're always thinking about what kind of music will enhance the experience of this work.
Because obviously Bach is a musician that is just timeless, and
absolutely.
So it feels very abstract and contemporary in many, many ways. At the same time, it's very heritagey and baroque, you know.
But it really adds an emotional element that is a beautiful added layer to the experience of engaging with the visual art.
Yeah. No, I remember. Do you remember the Gallery Rifle Maker?
Oh,
yes. Top Taylor and Virginia Dempster. So Rifle Maker was deliberately going against the idea of the white cube, because it was literally where they used to make rifles in the 19th century. And they decided when they went in there, we're just going to leave it as it is. The old Victorian fireplace stays. And the basis, everything's dark. We're not going to put any special lighting in. So they had some similar ideas. But I do remember them bringing in a grand piano with a young pianist, to play in that very small space. And then another week, they actually had, what's the name, Rojas, the Royal Opera Ballet, the Royal Ballet ballerina came in and danced.
Yes.
I missed that. I saw the pianist, but it was, it was, and there was a wonderful tension between the kind of contemporary visual art that they're showing, and then this tradition of who cares when this stuff was made or written. Artists usually don't see time, in my experience.
Well, I think that artists see time as elastic, that it's not linear. So you can play and dance between periods and genres and traditions and all of that, which is thrilling. But, watch this space. You've now inspired me. Some dancers to come.
Yes, it was going through my mind.
Maybe attempt Wayne McGregor to come and bring some of
this. Oh my goodness. Yes, please.
Aim high.
Yes, please. Why not?
And then let's talk about the current exhibition you first encountered Jaclyn Mednicov, Lupe, over 2 decades ago, and you've followed her practice. You didn't just, I now have learned, you just didn't just encounter your friends. You've followed her practice across countries, media and residences. So why was now the right moment to present her work here now in 2026? And why does it work in this specific domestic setting? Because you have worked in those galleries, more orthodox commercial galleries in the past. Why does her work so well here?
It's a really good question. And again, I mean, I think as intentional as I'd like to be and thoughtful about things, sometimes you don't have choices to make. They're sort of, you're directed down certain paths. And this it was the perfect timing for a lot of reasons, but mostly because she was finishing her residency. So the last 10 years of Jaclyn's artistic practice has had wonderful global focus on traditions, techniques, understanding herself within those contexts, observing what is around her. So it's now the culmination of her time spent. She did residencies in the US, in Vermont, and then she moved to the Netherlands, did 2 residencies there, and then has spent a lot of time in Japan. Her partner, who's also an artist, he's an industrial designer, kind of craft-based industrial designer, rooted in research and new techniques. He got a Fulbright scholarship. So they spent the last residency, they were there for 10 months. So that's a lot of time. She didn't go there with a plan. She just knew something's going to happen. And she got a studio, and then she got a residency, and these works, these incredible vessels were born from that. So it felt like, okay, it's been long enough for her to really investigate materiality, to explore these different media, and to have a playfulness that has landed in a place where she feels like she's really saying something with these new materials and new techniques. So again, things just happen kind of organically. And It coincided with her being back in Chicago, so I could go and visit her, bring the work back, hand bringing the work back. It's all, again, very personal, very intimate. And it's just, it feels so serendipitous that it has happened in this moment, in the spring. It's all quite natural and primavera, isn't it? So, the fact that we could open this exhibition in early spring it felt like really wonderful timing.
It just feels, yes. And it sounds as though you don't, it sounds as though you don't have those pressures, the same, maybe you have pressures, but it sounds as though you don't have the pressures maybe that a commercial gallery, you've got to balance the books. You've got to, you've got to think how much this place is costing us with business rates and so on. We've seen so many galleries in London, even the blue chip ones had to move out of Mayfair St James because they just can't afford that anymore. And so you've got that constant stress of, it doesn't feel as though your model, as you say, if this is happening organically and you're bringing in this work by someone that you've known for so long, and it just works very well. There's nothing artificial about that. There's probably planning behind it, but it doesn't feel as though there is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And for me, it really is just an extension of my character. I don't do anything quickly, David. I'm very slow, and I love the ingredients of time and temporal space. My father's a musician. I'm always thinking about, we were talking about John Cage earlier. Sometimes the space, the silence, the rest, it's why everything else feels more meaningful. So we don't want the artist to feel like they're rushed in and rushed out. We want the work to really land, to really arrive, to really be in dialogue with the space, with us. We want to live with it. We want to feel, again, like I said, the shifts within the interior of a single day. And we always keep a show on for 4 months because I want to straddle 2 seasons. I want it to move from winter to spring or spring to summer, because there are psychological shifts, not just the kind of environmental lighting shifts, but how we feel as the seasons move from one to the next.
And when a new show comes on, even the language feels wrong. We're looking at Jaclyn's work in here, but you then you see work by artists that you've already had. Exhibition even sounds wrong that you've shown here. And they seem to fit very, very well together. But there doesn't seem to be that commercial thing that we see, quite rightly, that you can also see we've still got some work by this artist that we showed 3 months ago in the room. But here it all seems to be fitting very nicely. You don't get a sense that artist is very, very different from Jaclyn.
I think that's just about the way we select the artists that we work with. Yes, exactly. So there's a kind of connective tissue, and we really genuinely only work with artists not only whose work we love, but whose character we love, who we're drawn to. So it's a very natural fit to want to have these kind of very intimate personal conversations about how things are going. And so when the show ends, the relationship doesn't end. It's just started, in a sense. So we have a huge desire to continue supporting and nurturing those artists. At the same time, each new artist is offered the entire house, but it's never been the case, except for our very first show, that the entire space was full of one artist. So now with each new show, there is usually, even if it's, as I showed you, the little kind of cubby holes, the nooks and crannies in the basement, that we use that space to show the work of our other artists, and to really have that ongoing sense of support and collaboration.
A sort of continuity and overlap.
Absolutely.
Again, coming back to Riflemaker, which closed because of the reasons that we said, that Virginia and Tot still work from home, and or in pop-ups. This is one of the new models as well. But I remember their gallery; they would have the traditional 3 months solo or sometimes group exhibition on the ground floor, and then when that had finished, they'd move it all up
Mm.
And then the basement they would use. So it was kind of, there was always a palimpsest of, there's always an overlap with their works. That was an interesting model as well.
Yeah,
And again, that's the kind of closest I can think of in my experience to what you're kind of doing.
Well, we do it not only with the work, we do it with the artists. Our artists have all gotten to know each other.
Oh, interesting.
And and they now, some of them communicate and interact separately from us.
From you, yes.
Because we've introduced them,
Yes.
and because they're people that like-minded people, the Wolf Collective, you know, and they're part of the collective, and they're contributing to that, and developing that.
Yeah. No, I did some podcasts in past years. With Jan David Malat, who has a commercial gallery in Mayfair in Davis Street, a relatively new gallery. But his artists, they all like one another's Instagram. You know, so Kojo Martha, I spoke to, and then Georgia Dimmock, and I notice on Instagram when they post something, they're always very supporting one another.
Yeah.
I went to Georgia, was part of a prize thing last year, and Kojo was there at the party. Supporting her, and she goes to his, you know, it's really, really nice, that relationship.
At the events.
And although they're competing with one another, there's no sense of...
No, they're, as I say, they're supporting each other, and they're talking about projects independently of us.
And that's wonderful. That's how it should be.
Yes.
Which is, again, it's just so fundamental, not just to the way that I engage with art, but to the way I engage with life. And I think the way you do anything is the way you do everything. And really, I am so deeply committed to community, to being in communion with each other, to collective joy, and to finding a tribe. And we're really doing that with not just with our artists, but with the collectors, even with our hospitality team. We love them, and the artists will come and have conversations while we're preparing. And there's lovely Catherine, who's always serving the drinks, and she's an academic, and she's bringing her own life experiences. It's not just one aspect; it's the whole story.
Yeah, and I this is quite personal in some ways, but I personally am impressed by the fact that both of you have worked towards this. It's not a privileged thing being here. It's a privilege in the sense that, you know, is what a lovely lifestyle that both of you have worked hard to get here in your own. Do you see what I'm saying there? I can imagine someone from a very, very, privileged family just setting something up like this artificially. And I would reckon it wouldn't work in the same way as when people use capital just to, I'm going to open an art gallery. It never works.
Both of us are much too down to earth for that.
Exactly. It's really, it's nice, is what I'm saying. So Jaclyn's work engages deeply, as you've shown me, with Japanese craft traditions. And the porcelain from Saga Prefecture, the washi, is that the right pronunciation? Washi paper from Awagami, and textile collaboration with Harigani, the artists based in Kyoto. So how does a home gallery setting change the way audiences encounter this kind of materially sensitive and research-driven practice? And you might want to say more about what happened to Jaclyn when she was in...
Yeah, sure.
Japan.
What I find really thrilling about being able to show with our voices as part of the dialogue about creating the exhibition is that we don't have to just stick to the work that was made in Japan. Jaclyn, yes, she's deeply interested in Japanese culture and artistic traditions, but that's not her full story. She's someone who is observing everything that's around her, regardless of where she is. So whether she's in the Netherlands or in a more urban sprawl, at her home in Chicago or at her studio in Chicago, she's constantly responding to her environment. So because this doesn't have to be a cohesive body of work and only work which has been composed in a specific place, everything's in dialogue with each other. So you do feel Japan here, but you also feel her time in the Netherlands and her experiences in the US, that it's all part of her story. It's, again, a very humanist way to approach things. It doesn't have to be so specific. So that's, again, one of the joys of showing in our own home, that it doesn't have to be controlled or contrived. by one project, and that's the only thing we're going to focus on. It can be much more expansive.
Yeah, so it doesn't really, it doesn't, it's about human experience in different parts of the world and different traditions, like in this case, Japan, but it's working, it doesn't have to be shown in Japan, it's working. So the interrelationship between what Jaclyn's imagination is doing with the traditional crafts of Japan, she's just bringing that into her own work.
Right. It's not about Japan. It's about Jaclyn and her observations and her investigations.
And artists have always done that. When oil was introduced to Italy, however that happened. But you're also talking about introducing one of your other artists to print. Printmaking. Matthew Hilton, and who is better known as a kind of sculptor of
the furniture making.
Exactly.
Contemporary furniture design.
A bit like Zaha Hadid, that he's kind of doing all sorts of.
Well, he's got some really iconic design. His Balzac chair,
absolutely,
and the extension table. These pieces, they are, a part of the canon of great British design. And, he is someone who is so expansive in the way he thinks and lives. And he wanted to make space, which was the show's title, Making Space, for new ways of seeing, new perceptions, new frameworks. And he's someone who's so interested in engineering and techniques and industry that he just, his brain is brimming with knowledge and curiosity. He's very inspired by music and the way that music sets a rhythm, sets a flow within his own art practice. So again, going back to that desire to create community, finding a tribe, making a tribe, we introduce our artists to each other. We introduce our artists to our framer, to our photographer who does all of the installation shots, who does portrait shots of them. It's all very connected. And how can we support each other? How can we keep this community growing and, kind of connecting within itself?
And then slightly different territory now. So private home galleries can sound exclusive by definition. This is a private space. I mean, my students, when they come to London, they even get scared, some of them, when they have to ring a bell to get into a gallery. And I say, going into the auction house is the obvious one. And they when we first visit, say, Sotheby's or Christie's, they're all really surprised at how friendly everyone is and how welcoming from the door person all the way through, And of course, this is part of the business of hospitality, but by definition, a private home, it's by appointment, it's domestic, it's discreet. People might feel as though they're walking into your private world. So how do you negotiate that tension?
Well, I mean, I think the way we operate is the opposite to that.
Yes.
The complete opposite to that. We've tried to democratize art, and we have quite large crowds here for our events. We had 130 people here. And there's a mix of people in the art world. There'll be somebody who works locally in a shop or something like that.
They come along.
Be part of it.
Gilmore.
Yeah.
5 dogs.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
And so it's about, and not a lot of these people may not go to a commercial gallery. They might be intimidated by that. But because we know them, or they're a friend of a friend and they've been asked here, they come to it as a home. And we've had some great conversations starting just because people have got to know each other here and just got into deep conversation and old connections being remade and things like that. So I get what you say about the home gallery can be intimidating, but we've consciously...
Way it actually works.
Yeah, we've consciously tried to avoid that.
Yeah. So it would be a mixture of inviting potential collectors or collectors that you've worked with, some artists, but also just some local people, friends,
just interesting people.
Interesting.
Yes, lots of the people who come to our events, we know that they're not going to buy anything. but they're part of our community.
Mhm.
And they come here, they enjoy the social
Mm-hmm.
aspect of it, they enjoy discussing the art,
Mhm.
discussing music, whatever, politics,
Like-minded.
whatever.
Yeah.
And the event, it's the usual 6 till 9,
Mhm.
but it can go on till 3 in the morning.
And you're too polite to say,
Yes,
I'm
yes.
tired, get out.
Yes, yes.
That's really interesting because in some ways you can sit what my mind is playing with here, and I'm seeing some parallels. I've already referred to a couple of other, more of orthodox commercial galleries
Yeah.
spaces, and again, they would say, oh well, we have that's why we have the kind of evening event, and we have an art critic interviewing our artists when we launch the show,
Yeah.
we're not going to stop people coming in, even if they coming off the street. We all, my
Yeah.
students gallery hop during the
Yeah.
freeze week and so on, and even if they haven't been invited, they go. And no worry, it's that kind of
Yeah.
the kind of democracy still. So really, there isn't probably that much difference in it.
No, and we, because it is our family home.
Mm. Obviously, you can't bring a stranger in.
Well, we have a guest list.
Yeah.
And there's someone on the
You have
door
yeah.
but
That's fair enough.
we brief them and we say,
if someone's interested,
if someone is interested, and if you're concerned about it, come and ask.
Come and ask us.
But otherwise, if
it's really nice.
and they've got to know who we invite and what the group is, and they very often will just usher them in, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I love it.
Mm.
And so connected to that question for Lupe, from a power dynamics perspective, the art world has long privileged certain kinds of spaces and behaviours. We've been talking about this. So do you see your model as redistributing kind of curatorial power, or simply because you've been a curator in that world as well, or is it just a relocation and a continuation of the same curatorial power?
Yeah, I really don't think about it in those
As
terms.
power.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, a lot of people do in the art world.
Yeah.
We have the Power 100, and
Yes, that's not.
No, it doesn't sound as though it's you.
But for me, really, it is about, again, community and the way that it's a ripple. The Wolf Collective is a kind of riverstone that we've cast into a pool of still water, and it is just making these undulations, and the community started as people that we knew personally, and they would then say to someone else, I've just been to this place and it was so curious, and there's a unique voice that's being created. It's layers and layers of creative people, milliners, actors, directors, musicians, guitar makers, the breadth of talent in this space for our events is astounding to me. And I look around at the writers, at the designers, and just think how special it is to be here now, right now, experiencing each other.
And some of those people invited would be from that world. There'd be curators from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Iain, you come from a background where buildings, land, and long-term financial thinking matter a great deal. So, how financially sustainable is a model like this? And what? I mean, it seems like a silly question, really, because it's your house. You're living here anyway. But what kinds of compromises does it avoid or introduce compared to commercial galleries, do you think?
Well, is it a sustainable financial model? We'll see. You can't say anything else to that.
Are you still operating as an architect?
No, I've retired from any day-to-day involvement in
but it's quite
architecture some years ago.
You're still working.
Yes,
you're still networking.
Yes, and I think what, in terms of finance, yes, it's a business. We hope that it will become viable and profitable. Well, it is viable, but and yes, we don't have the overheads of a normal gallery. We do have overheads, but they're not in the same way. So I think it's basically just we're carrying on, and we're actually monitoring it as we go. Lupe's not the person to discuss finances with. She doesn't like that, and but I try and monitor it on a regular
You have
basis.
to.
Yes, yeah,
To keep a dream going, you've got
yes,
to. We also live on,
yes,
in a material level.
Yeah.
yes, we do. Yes,
So grateful that I don't to engage with that. That my concerns can,
Yeah.
can be separate.
So it's a
Yeah.
good pairing.
yeah. Well, as I often say, she's the brains, I'm the oily rag.
Excellent. So more broadly, what does the Wolf Collective offer artists that they don't get elsewhere? And I think that's a fair question. And what does it deliberately not offer to the artists that you engage?
I will start with what we deliberately do not offer because I think this is unique to us. I am really an analog girl in a digital world. I don't want to have to present ourselves through social media. It's very much to me about one-on-one conversations like we are now, sitting across a table, looking each other in the eye, telling our human stories. That's very important to me. As I said, if you believe in humanity, you don't want to just be in the algorithm. You want to be in real life, in community. So for me, we don't, the fact that we deliberately steer clear of social media it's a very personal choice to me. And I am really holding tightly onto that, despite lots of people saying, why don't you have Instagram? Why don't,
Interesting.
I will not budge in that way. However, I'm very happy for our artists to show the space
If they want to,
on their own
yes.
pages, which I think is great. But I love, I love traditional things. I love old ways of thinking and bringing that, those, we didn't always have social media. I don't think it's the only way to communicate. So that's one thing that we don't offer. What I feel, what I would like to think that our artists feel and that they can take away is how excited we are to be working with them, that, there is true engagement, that there is constant dialogue. We're always thinking together about how we want to make something as a collaborative team. And it really is a collective in that respect. I want them to feel heard. I want them to feel supported. I want them to feel championed. I want them to know. I mean, Patti Smith talks often about how she didn't have enough belief in herself until she became so enmeshed in the life of Robert Mapplethorpe. And when someone she believed in really showed that belief back in her, it was, just explosive. And I want our artists to feel that. We've made a very, very specific choice to bring them and their work into our home. And that's a testament to how much we love what they do. So I want there to be that feeling of, support, nurture, investment, personal, commitment, and curiosity.
And I think I mentioned earlier about the people from different walks of life who come to our events, not necessarily just collectors. So I think what we're trying to do is bring people together, not just the artists, but people generally. And I know that the commercial galleries do that as well. But
not in the same.
I say we're trying to do it in our way.
Because by its very nature,
perhaps going back to the word we used ever, intimacy.
Yes, by its very nature, you get invited to a private view, and you think, oh gosh, I'm going to have to go home and wash and brush up, and then I'm going to have to travel back into work. It sounds as though this is more of a. I mean, A, it's a very attractive part of London next to Regent Park, and B, it sounds as though a lot of some of the activity anyway of this is local and community based.
Yes, a lot of it is. It's interesting. We get people coming up to us in the street and we've heard about this, and
I mean, the first artist that we showed, who was an incredibly precious friend to us, we spent Christmas with him at our home in the Cotswolds. He lives across the street. Literally, like we could throw a pebble and hit his house.
Yes.
And so it is, there is something which is, very local. I mean, I love that Oakwee and Wizor phrase of glocal. We're looking very much into the world,
Yeah.
but we're also really rooted in what is specific to this place. Very much Primrose Hill. You know, you could do the negative space between those two. You can see Primrose Hill right there.
Absolutely.
And that's informing all of us. So it's, we love that there is very much the voice of the place as well as one of the ingredients in the collective.
And we're very, very lucky in that Primrose Hill is it's full of creatives.
Yes.
And it's full of people who are interested in the arts. And so, you know, they're friends and we're talking to them about what they're doing. And they're asking us what we're doing.
Yes. Yeah. No, my colleague and deputy director of our master's art business program, she lives in Primrose Hill.
Does she?
And Berlin.
Well, you'll have to bring her to our
Yes.
She'd love it.
Yes.
She would love this sort of, she'd have that sensitivity, I think.
Yeah, I mean, last night we were at another opening of a photographer that we do some work with, and we bumped into a lady that lives up the street of Primrose Hill. I've lived here for 50 years. I didn't know her, but she's now coming to our next event.
That's lovely. That's lovely. So, so drawing towards a close, do you imagine the Wolf Collective as a singular house? Is this unique? The singular house with a singular voice, you know, with Lupe and Iain as a very important part of that, obviously integral part of that. Or do you think this is a prototype others might adapt? Do you think it could work? Would you like to see other people doing this? I know people do.
Definitely.
Do you know anyone in this general area who does a similar thing?
Yes, there's a really beautiful project just across the street. I mean, I think that there is the possibility for doing this is very foundational as part of the collective to be in this space because, as I say, of the intimacy and the personal dynamics here. But at the same time, the Wolf Collective is very much a movable feast. We've done things in other spaces, and we do things in the artist studios. We don't want it to be fixed. We want it to be fluid, and that's really important. I'm someone who really kind of turns away from rigidity, and it needs to remain a world of possibilities. So I like the fact that it's not kind of a necessity to only create
something on this location. I mean, would you consider if the curators of Frieze just down the road offered you a stand that was different from the Wolf Collective, would you consider?
Absolutely.
Do you think it would work there?
Absolutely.
Yes,
possibility never disappoints, and I'm very, very open to any of those kind of possibilities. Absolutely.
I think it's also just a way of also presenting what the model is to a bigger public as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the word their model, because I was going to say it's not a prototype, it's a model.
It is a model. Yeah, exactly.
But we do engage Fatosh Ustek, the curator of free sculpture. She was at one of our last events, actually the event with the brilliant cellist, Jack. And it's interesting because we've had conversations about it. And in a way, as open as someone like Fatosh is to experiencing this, the model of Frieze is a bit, I don't want to say limited, but it's specific. So that's working directly with commercial galleries. So there's not the same opportunities for us to do that. So
I was just thinking that, so we've been taking our students for many years to Artissima in Italy, in Torino. And the reason that we take them there is because it was, other galleries I think have copied their prototype, if you like. It was the whole point of it was engaged with the whole community. So they have a Saturday night where you go into town and the galleries that are showing there are also having parties in their galleries in town. But it's not just that, there are all these there's satellite events, but they're not just about selling art. So it's kind of like a community experience there, if you like.
That sounds
and I'm just thinking, there's Frieze is maybe a different kind of fair, but I can just imagine Artissima saying, why don't you come and talk about your
Yeah.
idea,
Oh, we
because
would
it's a
if
very ideas-centered
I mean,
thing.
if Fatosh came back and said, "Would you like to do something together?" The answer is absolutely yes. I mean,
course.
she's a brilliant curator,
Yeah.
and having any kind of opportunity to work alongside someone like her would be a great honor. And of course, we would want that for our artists to have that kind of exposure and
Yeah.
access to someone
Yes,
as
absolutely.
brilliant as she is.
I'm sure that we could carry on talking for a long time, but I think we've come to the end now. So Lupe and Iain, thank you both. So what I find compelling about the Wolf Collective is not just its aesthetics or its atmosphere, and I'm feeling that now, but the way it forces us, if you like, to ask harder questions about, and hopefully my students and alumni, about scale, value, attention, and care in the art world. And that I think that people who listen to this, I'm hoping it will plant a seed in their minds that maybe this is something I could do.
Yes.
Maybe not necessarily now. I've got to cut my teeth in the orthodox art world, if we can call it that. But maybe going forward, it's something that I can do one day,
Absolutely.
if you like. So for listeners interested in visiting, can I say this? The Wolf Collective exhibitions are open by appointment. So I'll put a link on the podcast. And the current Jaclyn Mednicov exhibition, which is wonderful. We probably haven't spoken enough about that, but this is a taster, an attempt to maybe come and have a look yourself.
Part 2.
Yeah, and it runs through the late summer. So this has been the Art Business podcast. The usual questions: please subscribe or like this, and it'd be really good to hear from all of you on that level. So once again, thank you very much to the two of you for acting as lovely hosts.
Thank you so much.
Sharing your art.
Thank you for talking to us.